Coming to you live via recording from Appleton, Wisconsin, it's time for your conservative smackdown. In this corner, your pugilistic pundit, the Duke of Diplomacy, the Professor of Patriotism, the Doctor of Domestic Tranquility.
This is Right Makes Might with Dr. Duke.
Hello and welcome to Right Makes Might. I'm Dr. Duke, your host, and that's Sparky, our producer behind the camera, pushing buttons cause he ain't pretty. And today, I want to talk to you about clocks, Pop-Tarts, and liberal double standards.
Oh my.
The fight comes to you today from Irving, Texas, where 14-year-old Ahmed Muhammad made national news by bringing a homemade clock to school to impress his engineering teacher. What happened was, Ahmed brought this device, you can see the picture there, and from my perspective, that doesn't look like a clock. Other commentators have rightly pointed out that not only does it not look like a clock, but Ahmed really didn't create anything here. He looks to be a store-bought clock that was taken apart, disassembled. You can see the wires, you can see all the different circuitry. This is not something that our enterprising young scholar actually put together or created from whole cloth. He disassembled something that already existed, which is fine. He brought that to school to show his engineering teacher in a suitcase, by the way. So the whole apparatus there is conveniently tucked into a suitcase. And the engineering teacher was impressed with his initiative, always wanting to encourage students, but warned him, you better be careful who you show that to, given the nature of today's academic situation, given zero tolerance policies all across our campuses. Anyway, in a subsequent class, an English teacher happened to see this homemade clock. He saw the clock, saw the briefcase. Shortly after, officers interviewed the student. MacArthur High School Director of Communications Leslie Weaver said, quote, "What the teacher was faced with was a beeping device in a suitcase in her class with wires and a timer." When you think of the absurdity of the modern academic system in this country, from kindergarten through high school and on into college, young girls can get suspended for bringing a couple Midol to class, right? You've got a situation where kids are being reprimanded for wearing NRA t-shirts, being removed from classrooms. And so the idea that somehow, now you have a kid who puts together this homemade device, brings it to class, it's beeping, making noise, wires coming out of a suitcase, and that now becomes where liberals draw the line in this country. As Chief of Police Larry Boyd in Irving, Texas said, quote, "We live in an age where you can't take things like that to school. Of course we've seen across our country horrific things happen, so we have to err on the side of caution." The thing I'd like to point out is that this is exclusively a liberal problem. This zero tolerance policy approach that our schools are taking across the country, it's a liberal invention. And it always blows me away that liberals who are constantly preaching tolerance, we must be understanding, we must not jump to conclusions, we must be willing to hear the other side. Liberals who pride themselves as the party, the philosophy of tolerance, they're the ones who've invented, wait for it, Spark, you got it, zero tolerance policies. How do you square that circle? Typical liberal hypocrisy. Well, not surprisingly, with all these other cases across the country of really out-of-control overreach on the part of our schools, school administrators, local police when it comes to what kids are bringing to school, we now have, all of a sudden, President Obama getting involved. President Obama heard about the situation with Ahmed and immediately invited him to the White House. Here's the tweet, right? "Cool clock, Ahmed. Want to bring it to the White House? We should inspire more kids like you to science. It's what makes America great." No, under your policies, President Obama and Joe Biden, we see here we've got Batman and Robin, the caped crusaders of liberal political correctness there. They're the ones, and their policies and the people who follow them and the school administrators who take a cue from them, it's people like these two caped crusaders who are the zero tolerance warriors. They want zero tolerance for guns, zero tolerance for t-shirts that advertise guns, zero tolerance for... Remember a few years ago when you had soldiers returning from places like Afghanistan and Iran and showing up in high schools and middle schools to surprise their kids who had not seen them in literally 6-8 months a year. And the schools were freaking out that you would have armed American soldiers in uniforms on a middle school campus. They were being escorted out. They were being told they couldn't show up to meet with the kids. This is the zero tolerance liberal platform that people like Biden, Obama, the entire progressive establishment has given us. What's really interesting, beyond the offer from President Obama, both Reddit and Twitter have stepped up to offer Ahmed scholarship internships. We've also got Google, who's reserved him a spot at their weekend science fair. We've got MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, asking Ahmed to visit their campus with his disassembled clock. And now we've got Facebook creator and uber liberal Mark Zuckerberg, who has invited Ahmed to visit the company's headquarters. Quote, "You've probably seen the story about Ahmed, the 14-year-old student in Texas who built a clock and was arrested when he took it to school. Having the skill and ambition to build something cool should lead to applause, not arrest. The future belongs to people like Ahmed. Ahmed, if you ever want to come by Facebook, I'd love to meet you. Keep building." This is the response of the American left to the Ahmed story. And yet, the irony of ironies, that we've had for years and years now other kids who are doing things at school that don't receive any praise, that get the same kind of punishment, the same kind of opprobrium heaped upon them that we perceive Ahmed got. And let's stop and think about that for a second. You're an English teacher. I'm an English professor. You're an English teacher. What possible understanding would you have of the inner workings of a clock? The idea that you would look into this beeping briefcase, see what an English teacher saw, and not understandably react the way that she did. The engineering professor, the engineering teacher who saw it first, he said, you better be careful where you show that. Well, then you've got the other side of the coin, what's been going on in this country for years. For instance, 7-year-old boy bit a Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun. You remember that? Pow, suspended. 3 6-year-old boys made finger guns during a game of cops and robbers during recess. Bam, suspended. 11-year-old who said the word gun on a school bus. Whammo, suspended. 5-year-old Pennsylvania girl, 5, played with her Hello Kitty bubble gun. Boom, zonk, suspended. 14-year-old West Virginia student who wore an NRA t-shirt to school, kablam, suspended. A 6-year-old Colorado boy kissed a classmate on the hand, ka-chow, suspended and charged with sexual harassment. None of these kids ever got apologies. None of these kids ever were invited to any kind of organizations or events to the White House. None of them were ever given any reassurance that ultimately what they did was understandable given the circumstances. No apologies were offered to the parents who had to put up with this. No offers made to pay the legal fees of these kids who tried to fight back. In fact, you stop and think about these tolerant liberals and their zero tolerance policies. Some standard observations from across the country. These are all just generic zero tolerance policy codes from various middle and high schools across the country. In one instance, we have under the no weapons policy, students receive the same consequence for bringing a sharp nail clipper to school as if they had brought a pocket knife or a Bowie knife or anything for that matter. We don't distinguish. A sharp nail clipper, right? A nail file with a point on it. A Bowie knife, one of those big Rambo knives with the serrated edges. Kids get punished the exact same way under any of those offenses. How about under the no drug policy? Students with cough drops or mouthwash can receive the same punishment as students found in possession of marijuana. School harassment policies, right? No student can kiss or hug in school. As a result, a kindergarten student who hugs another student can be actually expelled under these broad no tolerance policies. And of course, a student who brings a model rocket to school can be expelled because the rocket propulsion can be considered a weapon. So talk about feats of engineering, right? Young kids bring remote control rocket to school, propulsion instrument. That's dangerous because that can be considered a bomb. But a beeping box full of wires and circuitry, that is call for a rallying around Ahmed and all sorts of anti-Islamophobic action being taken. The idea that somehow Ahmed's race was the key factor. Do you honestly believe if Bubba's kid in Arkansas brought a box to school with wires hanging out of it that was beeping and all sorts of circuitry, do you actually believe the teachers in Arkansas would not have reacted exactly the way Ahmed's teacher responded? And given the zero tolerance policies put in place by these liberal progressives, right, by our caped crusaders in the White House and all the way on down that liberal progressive food chain, it's exactly what you'd expect to happen. More examples of this. A 13-year-old boy in California shared his school lunch with a hungry friend. For that, he received a detention. Superintendent of the school said, quote, "Because of the safety and liability issues, we cannot allow students to actually exchange meals." So literally swapping food in the lunchroom is cause for suspension or detention. Unbelievable. A Texas school forbids students from bringing sunscreen on a field trip. Quote, "We can't allow toxic things to be in our schools. The children could possibly have an allergic reaction or ingest it. It's really a dangerous situation." So a little bit of copper tone is dangerous to the point of censorship. A second grade teacher in Chicago was suspended for bringing screwdrivers and other tools to class and demonstrating how to use them. Spark, we're just 6 months away from shop class on high school campuses being all completely virtual. Can you imagine teaching kids how to make little ashtrays and birdhouses? Now they won't be able to use tools in shop class to do that because the tools might be used as weapons. So we're going to go to you know what we need? Money-making idea. We need to invent Nerf tools. Nerf screwdrivers, Nerf hammers, so that nobody could be able to build anything, but that seems to be a perfect metaphor for our schools these days. Everybody will be content with that, right? Oh, good Lord. 13-year-old, and my personal favorite, of zero tolerance, our Caped Crusaders of progressivism, zero tolerance in action. A 13-year-old in New Jersey was twirling a pencil in class. Twirling a pencil, which made the student sitting behind him feel, quote, "threatened and uncomfortable," unquote. The boy was sent for a 5-hour physical examination and a corresponding psychological evaluation. His urine was tested and his blood was drawn. So now pencils in class are now dangerous weapons. Twirling. I wonder if the Ohio State Marching Band called this kid up and said, "We need more twirlers. We want you to come to Ohio State for an internship," right? Maybe you could be internship with the marching band. You could be drum leader, right? With all those No, that didn't happen. The superintendent of schools on this particular issue said, quote, "We never know what's percolating in the mind of children." Well, evidently we know what was percolating in Ahmed's mind, right? Pure innocence, pure resolve, pure love of engineering, MIT, Zuckerberg, the Obama White House, they knew what was percolating in Ahmed's mind, and it was all benevolence, sunshine, and roses. But heaven help you if you're a white kid twirling a pencil, or a Hispanic kid with a couple of Midol. Then we've got a real issue, or a Jewish kid, right? Who's using actual tools in shop class. Now we've got a problem. The superintendent said we never know what's percolating in the minds of kids. When they demonstrate behaviors that raise red flags, we must do our duty. And then we have 13-year-old boy, Georgia boy, C.J. Pearson. And C.J. Pearson, you got to give him credit. Within hours of the Obama overreaction, within hours of inviting Ahmed to the White House, C.J. Pearson took it to the president.
To go even further, Mr. President, when cops are being gunned down, you don't invite their family to the White House. You never did. But when a Muslim kid builds a clock, well, come on by.
And a child shall lead them, right? It is amazing that our middle and high school kids have infinitely more common sense than the president, the vice president, and this whole administration full of left-wing wackadoodles who see it as their major operating principle when it comes to education to social engineer, to enforce these absolute radical zero policy initiatives that are intolerant. And this is it. In modern contemporary culture, you see other liberals being dragged into this muck and mire because these zero tolerance policies are equally discriminatory.
Do you have a question or comment you'd like Dr. Duke to respond to? Email the show at media@fpeusa.org.
And now it's time for our knockout round. You know what's really shocking about all of this is that there is a really alarming number of progressives in this country, an inordinately high number of our progressive elite, who they're like drug addicts. They crave racial incidents. They crave gender intolerance. They crave Islamophobia. It really is shocking on the left how many people in prominent places, they need their fix, right? It's like they're jonesing. They want there to be incidents like this. They want to make something out of nothing. They want to see, in the case of Ahmed, Ahmed a case of Islamophobia. They are incapable of seeing this as the thousands of other incidences where non-Islamic kids, non-Muslim kids are getting singled out and persecuted every day. That rolls off their back as par for the course, part of their power as liberal progressives. But one little Muslim kid gets harassed in this way, and I agree, by the way. I think the furor that surrounded Ahmed's little experiment is every bit as absurd as the furor that surrounded all those other kids. It's the double standards that are again shocking to us. There is a huge percentage of the American left that actively seeks out instances of racism where there are none, seeks out instances of Islamophobia. You think back to the 9/11 attacks. There were all these predictions that Muslims were going to be hunted, persecuted, rounded up. They were going to be alienated, ostracized. It never happened. In fact, one of the great, remarkable appeals for the pre-tolerance of America, how tolerant a country we are, is all those predicted events never happened. And yet, the left can't stand the fact that we've made progress. The entire left aggravation machine, it's driven by faux moral outrage. That's what you have here. That you've got to drum up these kind of outrageous situations and turn them into cause celebs to prove the point that things are as bad as you say you are, so you can justify appropriating more power for yourself to enforce more zero-tolerance policies in, ironically, the name of tolerance. And that's our knockout punch. I'm Dr. Duke. Thanks for joining us today.
Don't miss a second of Dr. Duke. Visit FreedomProject.com and sign up for our free newsletter. Like us on Facebook or follow us in the Twitterverse. All the links can be found at FreedomProject.com.